I gave my daughter $50,000 for her dream wedding. She used it, then told her guests I was dead because I didn't fit the decor. I stayed silent, waited, and walked in with the truth. She threw a tomato at me. Before we begin, please subscribe, and I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? I stood at my kitchen window, morning coffee cooling in my hand, staring at the framed photo of my late wife and daughter, wondering how a promise of love had turned into such unbearable distance. I could still see Ellen's face as clear as if she were standing in front of me that morning, though it had been almost 15 years since she passed. She was pale and thin in those last days, her once strong hands trembling when she held mine in the hospital. Her eyes, though, had never lost their fire. She had whispered to me in a raspy voice, asking for one thing above all others, that the life insurance money she left behind would go to our daughter, Victoria. She wanted our little girl to have college, a wedding, a future that Ellen herself would never see. I promised her, right there at her bedside, that I would carry that burden. I had sworn on my soul to protect Victoria, to give her the best chance at life, even if it cost me everything. That vow had shaped the years since. Every overtime shift at the construction site, every worn pair of boots, every meal I skipped so I could pay tuition or buy her textbooks, it was all for that promise. That morning, the neighborhood around me hummed with Memorial Day weekend sounds. Lawnmowers droned across the street. Kids pedaled their bikes with flags fluttering from the handlebars. The neighbor, 2 doors down, was already grilling, the faint aroma of charcoal drifting on the warm breeze. My own house was quieter, filled with the creaks and sighs of an old structure that had settled with me over the years. The photo of Ellen and Victoria at the county fair sat on the counter. Ellen's arm wrapped around our pigtailed daughter, cotton candy in hand, both of them smiling at me through time. I set the mug down carefully, tracing the rim with my thumb. I had carried those promises like steel beams across my back. And yet, standing there in my kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria had drifted far beyond my reach. That fear became flesh and blood a moment later. Tires screeched outside, gravel spitting from the driveway. The sound was sharp, jarring, and out of place among the calm suburban noises. I glanced out the window and saw the glint of polished chrome, a sleek, black Mercedes rolling to a halt at the curb. The car's glossy surface reflected the waving flags along the street. My heart tightened. The horn blared, impatient and shrill. That was not a neighbor's casual visit. That was my daughter. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the front door. The late spring air carried the scent of lilacs from the bush Ellen had planted years ago. It should have been comforting. Instead, it stung, because I knew Ellen would never have imagined this distance between father and daughter. Victoria stepped out of the car, high heels clicking against the cracked driveway as though she didn't notice the uneven ground. Her blazer was tailored perfectly, pearls at her throat gleaming against her skin, her hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to reshape her face. She looked like a woman who had conquered something, but to me, she looked like someone who had erased where she came from. "Dad," she said, flat and clipped, not even bothering with a hello. She adjusted her sunglasses, the lenses catching the morning light, shielding her eyes from me. I forced a smile, though my heart was already sinking. "Victoria, what a surprise. Come in. I just brewed some coffee." She didn't smile back. Her heels struck sharp against the porch as she followed me inside. I guided her toward the kitchen table. She glanced at the counters, cluttered with coffee mugs and grocery flyers, and at the old refrigerator, where faded family photos still clung by magnets. One of them showed her as a gap-toothed child with Ellen and me at the state fair, beaming with sticky fingers and laughter. She didn't glance twice at it. Instead, she set her designer purse down with a thud and crossed her arms. "Look, Dad, I don't have much time. The wedding is coming up in a month. I need to talk to you about it." I poured her a cup of coffee anyway, sliding it across the table like an offering. "Sure, honey. What's on your mind? Need help with anything?" My voice was even, as it had always been, steady for her sake. Since Ellen's passing, I had lived my life as a foundation stone, unmoving, patient, willing to carry the weight. But she didn't reach for the cup. She stared at it as though it were beneath her. "No, Dad. Actually, I don't want you there." Her words landed like a slap, blunt and unforgiving. I froze, the mug halfway to my lips. "What do you mean?" She sighed, as though she were explaining something to a stubborn child. "Come on, be realistic. My fiancé's family, they're elite business owners, influencers, people who move in circles you wouldn't understand. The venue is an upscale club downtown, chandeliers, tuxedos, the works. You'd stick out like a sore thumb in your old suit. It would be embarrassing. Her tone sharpened, her eyes narrowing above the rim of her sunglasses. You look like you've been living under a bridge half the time. No offense, but I can't have that at my wedding. The kitchen seemed to shrink around me. The smell of coffee and wood polish clashed with the expensive perfume wafting from her clothes. I set the mug down carefully, though my knuckles whitened as they gripped the table's edge. Embarrassing, I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. Victoria, I'm your father. I raised you after your mother died. I used her insurance money for your tuition at that fancy marketing school. I worked double shifts so you could have those dance lessons you begged for. I skipped vacations so you could have every chance. She rolled her eyes and waved a manicured hand. Oh, please. Not the sob story again. That was ages ago. This is my life now, my big day. I deserve it to be perfect without you dragging it down. She reached into her purse and pulled out a cream-colored wedding invitation, embossed with gold, heavy stock that spoke of wealth. She tossed it onto the table like a discarded receipt. It skidded toward me, one corner crumpling against my knuckle. My chest burned with something I had not felt in years, anger, hot and rising. I had always been patient, the fixer, the one who absorbed the blows. But now, staring at that card, something in me snapped. Dragging it down, I repeated, my voice low but quaking. Is that what I am to you now? A liability because I don't drive a Mercedes, because I don't hobnob with your groom's family? I stood, the chair scraping sharply across the linoleum. Victoria's face flushed, but she did not back down. Yes, exactly. You're a relic, Dad. Stay home, watch television, whatever you do. Just don't ruin this for me. Thank you for watching. I moved to the doorway as she grabbed her purse. I didn't block her way aggressively, only enough to make her pause. You think you can erase me like that? After everything? She shoved past me, her shoulder brushing mine roughly. Get out of my way. The screen door banged against the frame as she stormed outside. She spun back at the car, her eyes blazing like flares. And don't even think about showing up. If you do, I'll have security drag you out. They exter doing this. She slammed the car door, and the engine roared. The tires spit gravel as she sped away, leaving dust to settle on my porch like ash. I stood frozen, staring at the empty street, the invitation still lying on the table behind me like a taunt. My fists clenched until the veins bulged in my hands. Inside my chest, a storm gathered, cold and heavy. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The silence in the house pressed in once she left, heavier than the fading echo of her engine. I lingered at the doorway, the breeze slipping through the screen, carrying the hum of distant traffic. My heart pounded, not just from rage, but from a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Slowly, I turned back to the kitchen. The invitation lay there, mocking me with its elegance. I picked it up, tracing the gold lettering with a calloused finger. May 30th, the Grand Hall downtown. A far cry from my modest living room, with its sagging couch and shelves lined with dusty manuals from my construction days. I sank onto the couch, the springs creaking beneath me, and reached for the framed photo on the end table. It was one of the last of Ellen, with Victoria between us, maybe 8 years old, all pigtails and laughter at a park picnic. The photo's edges were worn from years of handling, but the memory was still sharp. What happened to you, kid? I muttered to the quiet room. Memories surged. Ellen's last night in the hospital, my promise. Selling the bigger house downtown to cover the bills. Moving to this modest place on the outskirts of Kansas City. Working overtime, double shifts, designing roads and bridges while my own life crumbled. And when Victoria dreamed of college, I had dipped into savings, handing her check after check, $50,000 earmarked for her future, her wedding fund. I remembered her tears at graduation, her hug that felt so real. Thanks, Dad. You're the best. Those words echoed now like a cruel joke. The anger simmered, then cooled into something sharper, more deliberate. Justice, not rage. She wanted to erase me. I would show her the truth in front of everyone she tried to impress. I rose, pacing the living room as the sun sank lower, shadows stretching across the carpet like cracks in an old road. From the drawer of the coffee table, I pulled out a notebook. It had once held schematics for bridges, lines and angles calculated to hold great weight. Now, it would hold a new kind of design. I wrote the first line in bold strokes. Attend the wedding. Under it, I wrote, Speak the truth. My pen scratched with a steady rhythm, the way it once had when I was plotting beams and trusses. But this time, The structure I was building was not of steel, it was of justice. The clock ticked in the dim room as the plan began to take shape, and though I felt the burn of betrayal in every breath, something else settled in my chest, a resolve hardening like concrete. She thought she could silence me. She thought she could bury me. But I would not be erased. I stood in the quiet, the notebook heavy in my hands, and knew one thing with certainty. This was only the beginning. When the phone rang, I expected a friendly check-in, but instead, an old friend whispered through tears, "I thought you were gone. Victoria told us you died." The words clung to the air like smoke. I froze where I stood, the receiver pressed against my ear, my eyes fixed on the linoleum floor of my kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence between Margaret's sobs, and in that heavy moment, it felt as though the ground beneath me had shifted. I had thought nothing could cut deeper than being told by my own daughter that I was not welcome at her wedding, that my presence would embarrass her. But this was something darker. I remembered a night long ago, kneeling beside Ellen's grave when the air smelled of rain and cut grass. I had pressed my palm against the cool stone and whispered, "I'll be both father and mother. She'll never feel abandoned." It had been the foundation of everything I did afterward. Yet here I was, listening to the betrayal that proved my promise meant nothing to the one person it was intended for. The chapter of my life that I thought had already broken beyond repair was now cracked even further. "Margaret," I whispered back into the receiver, my throat tightening. "What did you just say?" Her voice trembled, as if she had rehearsed it 100 times, but still couldn't believe the words. "Franklin, your daughter told us you were gone. She said you passed, suddenly, some kind of accident. My daughter heard it from her directly. I sent flowers, Franklin. I wrote in my journal about you, mourning you these last weeks. And now you answer the phone. Dear Lord." I gripped the counter with my free hand, the edge biting into my palm. I glanced at the window, where the neighbor's flag swayed gently in the evening breeze. The normalcy outside clashed cruelly with the chaos unraveling inside me. "She told you I was dead?" I asked slowly, each word dragged from my chest like iron beams. "Yes," Margaret whispered. I could hear the disbelief turning to anger in her tone. "Victoria said you'd passed, Franklin. She spoke so casually, as if it were a fact. She even thanked us for our condolences, like it was all settled truth." I closed my eyes, the image of my daughter forming in my mind, her expensive blazer, her pearls, the way she looked at me like a stranger. I had thought her cold dismissal at the kitchen table was the deepest cut she could make, but declaring me dead, that was not just betrayal, that was erasure. My hand shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. "Margaret," I said, my voice low, "please, don't tell anyone you've spoken to me yet. Let her think I'm buried. Let her build her perfect world on that lie. I need her to show her true colors in front of everyone." Margaret inhaled sharply. "Franklin, that's dangerous. What are you planning?" I swallowed hard. "The truth, Margaret. Nothing more, nothing less." There was a pause, then her voice softened, heavy with compassion. "Ellen would be heartbroken to hear this. I'll keep your secret for now, but please, be careful. Call me if you need me." I hung up, the click loud in the stillness of my kitchen. I stood there for a long time, staring at the shadowed reflection of my face in the dark window, the lines of age and sacrifice etched deeper than ever. The room spun as I paced across the worn floor. My daughter had buried me alive, not out of grief, not out of mistake, but out of shame. She wanted me erased, because I was an inconvenient reminder of where she came from. I pressed both palms against the counter and bowed my head. The anger inside me was no longer the sharp, searing burn of rage. It had crystallized into something colder, more dangerous. Outside, cicadas began their nightly chorus, buzzing against the hum of distant traffic. Across the street, the neighbor's television flickered with a baseball game, muffled cheers carrying across the lawns. Life went on in the suburbs, simple and steady, while mine tilted into madness. I tried to steady my breathing. I thought of Ellen again, her hair falling loose around her shoulders the first time I saw her, her laughter echoing through the years we built together, her fierce determination in those hospital days. She would have never believed our daughter capable of such cruelty. But I could not deny the truth. I could not run from it. My daughter had killed me with words, and now I had to decide how I would rise. I walked into the living room, my steps heavy against the creaking wood. The framed photos stared back at me from the shelves, Victoria's high school graduation, her first car I had fixed with my own hands. her college acceptance letter taped proudly to the fridge years ago. Every memory was a monument to sacrifice, and every one of them mocked me now. I pulled one photo from the frame, the one of her at 16, smiling with braces, her arm draped over my shoulders. I held it close, my throat tightening. You were my world, Victoria. What happened to you? I set it down carefully, almost reverently, then picked up my old notebook from the coffee table. I opened to the first page, where I had scrawled, "Attend the wedding and speak the truth." Now, I added another line beneath it in bold, steady strokes. Let her bury herself in her lies. The pen scratched against the paper with the same steady rhythm I once used to mark measurements on blueprints. Each stroke carried weight, precision. I wasn't just writing, I was engineering justice. I slumped back into the couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned lazily above me. My mind spun faster than those blades, calculating, considering. If she could tell others I was dead, she could lie about anything. But lies, I knew from decades of work, could never hold weight like steel. They bent, they cracked, they collapsed when tested, and I would be the weight that tested them. The next day passed in a haze. I kept to myself, repairing a loose hinge on the back door, mowing the lawn until sweat dripped into my eyes. Anything to keep my hands busy while my mind churned. By evening, I sat back on the porch, the sky streaked orange and purple. A cold beer in my hand, I watched the neighborhood children light sparklers, their laughter filling the air. For a moment, I envied their innocence, wished I could trade places with their fathers, men who didn't know the sting of betrayal so deep it hollowed them out. But envy faded into resolve. I wasn't done. When night fell, I returned to my desk. I opened my old laptop, its fan whining as though it struggled to breathe. I searched for news of weddings at the Marriott downtown, scrolling until I found the event page for Victoria's big day. There, it was, her smiling face, her fiancé's arm around her, the promise of perfection, and beneath it, comments from guests. Condolences for her loss, admiration for her strength to carry on with the wedding despite her father's supposed death. My hands curled into fists. I shut the laptop with a snap and leaned back in the chair, staring at the shadows stretching across the ceiling. I thought again of Margaret's voice, soft but fierce. Her true colors need to be shown publicly. Yes, I thought, in the place she values most, in front of the people she desperately wants to impress. I would not simply show up. I would rise from the grave she dug for me. I would force her to face the weight of her own lies in a room filled with witnesses. I rubbed my tired eyes and stood, walking slowly through the quiet house. Each step seemed louder than the last, echoing my determination. By the time I reached the bedroom, the decision was carved into me like stone. I slid under the covers, the sheets cool against my skin. The house settled around me, groaning as if it, too, bore the weight of years. I closed my eyes, but sleep was slow to come. When it finally did, it brought dreams of Ellen's voice and Victoria's laughter as a child, tangled with the lie of my death. I woke before dawn, sweat on my brow, my chest heaving. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the pale light seeping through the curtains, and whispered to the empty room, "If she wants me buried, she'll see me rise." At the supermarket checkout, I spotted Margaret again, and over steaming mugs at a downtown cafe, my plan began to take shape. The moment our eyes met in that fluorescent aisle, it was as though years had melted away. Margaret Doyle stood with a basket of apples and bread, her silver hair pulled back, her glasses perched low on her nose. She blinked in disbelief, then her expression softened into a mixture of relief and worry. For weeks she had believed me dead, and now here I was, alive, flesh and blood before her. I smiled faintly, the kind that carried more sadness than joy. "Margaret," I said, stepping forward. "What a surprise." She set her basket down on the end cap and pulled me into a hug. Her lavender scent was the same as it had been when she and Ellen spent afternoons baking cookies in our kitchen years ago. It was grounding, a reminder that there were still people who saw me, who remembered the man I was. We exchanged pleasantries for a moment, speaking of groceries and gardens, but her eyes searched mine with a depth that pierced through the surface. She lowered her voice, her tone serious. "Franklin, we need more than this chance meeting. Let's talk properly. Brood Awakening, downtown. 2 hours. Will you come?" I nodded. "I'll be there." The ride into Kansas City that afternoon felt different from all my years of commuting to job sites. Instead of scanning the skyline for steel beams and cranes, I studied the rhythm of the city like a man preparing for battle. Traffic moved smoothly along the tree-lined boulevards. Couples strolled with coffee cups in hand, and Memorial Day flags waved above shop doors. Normalcy everywhere, while my life was anything but. Brood Awakening was tucked between a bookstore and an antique shop. Exposed brick walls, chalkboard menus with clever names for lattes, and the steady hum of conversation created a warmth that contrasted with the storm building inside me. I arrived a little early and claimed a corner table by the window. The barista brought me a black coffee that steamed in a ceramic mug, its heat sinking into my palms as I waited. Margaret arrived right on time, punctual as always. She spotted me, waved softly, and slid into the seat across from mine. She ordered a latte and wrapped her hands around the cup when it came, as though drawing strength from the warmth. For a few minutes we indulged in light chatter, her tulips blooming in her front yard, the porch repairs I had finished last week. It was like stepping into a gentler time, a reminder of Ellen's laughter when the three of us once sat around my kitchen table. But then Margaret set her spoon down with a quiet clink, her face serious. "All right, Franklin, enough small talk. What happened?" I took a long sip of my coffee, the bitter taste bracing me. She came by last week, pulled up in her car like a queen inspecting her kingdom. She sat at my table and told me I wasn't welcome at her wedding, said I'd embarrass her. And then my voice caught. Then she went further. She told everyone I was dead, Margaret. You believed it yourself. Margaret's mouth fell open. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her cup tighter. Dead? She told us you were dead? Good Lord, Franklin, that's monstrous. Ellen would be. She trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. I stared out the window, watching the street traffic blur past, voices muffled by the glass. She buried me alive with words, not out of grief, not out of accident, but because I don't fit her polished world. She erased me to protect her image. Margaret reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Her eyes were filled with fire. You can't let this stand. If she's willing to go that far, she'll keep digging until there's nothing left of the truth. You need to show people who she really is. Her words resonated deep inside me. For days I had felt anger, betrayal, the ache of loss. But now, sitting across from Margaret, I felt something new. Clarity. I've been thinking the same, I said. I'll show up. Not to scream or cause a scene, but to reveal the truth, in front of everyone she wants to impress. If she wants me gone, then I'll rise right where it hurts most. Margaret squeezed my hand. Do it. And when you do, know that you're not alone. You've still got people who believe in you. Her loyalty steadied me. Ellen had always trusted Margaret, and I could almost feel my wife's spirit nodding in approval. After we parted ways, I drove home under a sky thick with clouds, the evening light dimming. The house welcomed me with its familiar creaks, but I no longer saw it as just walls and windows. Tonight, it was a war room. I sat at my desk, pulling open the drawer where my old construction notebooks lay. Their pages were filled with sketches of bridges, calculations, diagrams of beams designed to hold weight under pressure. My hands lingered on the pencil marks, the ghosts of a career built on precision and endurance. I grabbed a fresh notebook and began to write. Not beams and trusses this time, but steps and strategy. Step 1, attend the wedding. Step 2, gather proof of my sacrifices, of her erasure. Step 3, speak the truth, not with fury, but with the quiet authority of a man who has carried the weight. I paused, tapping the pen against the paper. Proof. That was key. Words could be twisted, but evidence could not. I pulled out old photographs, letters, receipts, pieces of my life that told the story of who I was and what I had given. But I needed more, a way to expose her greed in a single stroke. That night, as I sat in the dim glow of the desk lamp, an idea surfaced. It came from the same part of me that had built bridges to last lifetimes. I would give her exactly what she wanted, or at least what she thought she wanted. Money. Ellen's insurance. The $50,000 she had left for Victoria's wedding. The very promise Victoria now wielded like a weapon. She expected it. She counted on it, so I would give her a check. But not a real one. A counterfeit. Inked in my hand, sealed in an envelope. Bait for her greed. She would deposit it without question, blinded by her desperation. And when it bounced, it would prove her hunger had outpaced her integrity. The plan clicked into place with a cold precision that sent shivers through me. For years I had designed structures to withstand storms. Now, I was designing a collapse. The following evening, as I tightened a hinge on the back porch and swept sawdust from the steps, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, saw her name, and felt a surge of grim satisfaction. I answered. Hello. Her voice was frantic, rushed. Dad, thank God. I need to talk about the money. The 50,000 Mom promised would go toward my wedding. The bills are piling up. The caterers are threatening to walk. And Alex's family has already paid their part. You need to send it today. Please. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her squirm. Then I said calmly, I'll take care of it. Thanks. There was a sharp exhale of relief on the other end. Finally. About time. Thank you. I'll come by tomorrow to pick it up. We hung up, and I sat on the porch steps, the sky glowing pink with sunset. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I felt the same steady focus I used to feel when walking a job site, calculating angles and stress loads. The next morning, I wrote the check. My handwriting was deliberate, each number carefully inked. I slipped it into an envelope with her name on the front. Holding it, I felt the weight of both betrayal and justice. When she arrived later that day, her Mercedes gleaming in the drive, she stormed inside without knocking. Her face was flushed, her movements jerky. Do you have it? She demanded, her eyes darting around the room as though searching for weakness. I handed her the envelope. She snatched it, tore it open, and peeked at the check inside. A greedy smile flickered across her lips, quickly hidden under a mask of composure. About time, she muttered, stuffing it into her purse. Don't think this changes anything. You're still not coming. She spun on her heel, her perfume lingering as the screen door slammed shut behind her. Her car engine roared, tires squealing as she sped away. I stood at the window, watching her disappear down the street. The quiet settled again, heavy but satisfying. This was the blueprint. This was the beginning of the collapse she had built for herself. I turned back to the notebook on my desk, adding the final step beneath my careful handwriting. She'll cash this and bury herself. My phone buzzed late in the afternoon, and my daughter's frantic voice spilled through the line. Dad, I need the money now. The caterers are threatening to pull out. Her words came sharp and fast, like nails driven into wood without rhythm. I sat at my kitchen table, the late light filtering through the lace curtains, turning everything in the room gold. The checkbook lay open before me, the pen resting across its spine like a waiting tool. My heart was steady. I had been expecting this call, but hearing the desperation in her voice struck me with a strange mix of sorrow and grim satisfaction. I thought of Ellen then, of the way she had looked at me in those final days, her hands squeezing mine with the little strength she had left. She had wanted so badly for Victoria to have everything she herself had been denied. Promise me, she had whispered, her voice thinner than paper. Promise you'll make sure she's taken care of. At the time, I had thought the vow would be a way of honoring Ellen. Now it felt like a chain around my neck. But promises, like steel, could be reforged. Victoria, I said, keeping my voice calm, almost soothing. Slow down. What's going on? She exhaled sharply, a tremor of panic threading her tone. The wedding bills are due. The Marriott wants their balance. The caterers are threatening to walk, and Alex's parents are furious that we haven't settled our end. You said you'd promised, Mom. This is the time, Dad. I need the $50,000 now, not tomorrow. Now. Thanks for watching. I let the silence hang for a long moment, tapping my finger against the table. Outside, the wind pushed through the trees, their shadows stretching long across the lawn. Finally, I said. All right, I'll have something for you. Come by. There was a pause on the other end, as though she hadn't expected me to yield so quickly. Then, with a rush of relief, she said, Good. I'll be there within the hour. She hung up before I could respond. I rose from the table, my legs stiff, my body heavy with age and years of labor, and crossed to the desk in the corner of the living room. The notebook lay there, my blueprint of justice. I flipped it open, rereading the steps I had laid out, each one a beam in the structure I was building. Attend the wedding, speak the truth, show the proof, bury her in her own greed. I pulled open the drawer and withdrew the envelope I had already prepared. Inside was the check I had written that morning, deliberate in every stroke of the pen. It looked real enough numbers and lines and careful script, but the account number was one I had invented. I had even called an old colleague at First National Bank, a man who owed me a favor, to make sure it would bounce in precisely the way I intended. The envelope felt heavy in my hand, though I knew it weighed almost nothing. It was heavy with the truth it carried. When her Mercedes pulled into the driveway, its polished hood gleaming in the fading light, I didn't rise to meet her right away. I watched from the window as she stepped out, heels clicking against the gravel. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup sharp, but her movements betrayed her quick, jittery, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. She didn't knock. She stormed inside like she owned the place, her perfume clashing with the faint scent of wood polish that lingered in the air. "Do you have it?" she demanded, her voice taut. I held up the envelope. "Right here." She reached for it immediately, her manicured nails flashing. I pulled it back just slightly, meeting her eyes. "This is what your mother wanted for you," I said quietly. "But remember something, Victoria. Money doesn't erase where you come from. It doesn't erase who you are. This is not meant as redden." Her lips curled into a smirk, the kind of smirk that came from years of entitlement. "Save the lecture, Dad. Just hand it over." I let the envelope fall into her hand. She tore it open, pulled out the check, and gave it a quick glance. Relief spread across her face like a mask snapping into place. For a second, she almost looked like the little girl who had once squealed when I surprised her with a used car on her 18th birthday. But the innocence was gone, replaced by calculation. "About time," she muttered, slipping the check into her purse. "Don't think this fixes anything. You're still not invited." Her words sliced, but I didn't flinch. I simply nodded, my face unreadable. She spun on her heel, the screen door creaking and banging shut behind her. Her car engine roared as she sped down the street, gravel spitting behind her tires. I stood in the silence that followed, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, and let out a long, slow breath. The house seemed to exhale with me, the old wood groaning softly. I walked back to the desk and sat down, opening the notebook once more. Beneath my careful handwriting I added a single line. "She thinks she's won." The phone buzzed again an hour later. I glanced at the screen. A text message. "Deposited. Thanks." I smiled, slow and deliberate. She had done exactly what I expected. Her greed was a blueprint as predictable as any structure I had ever built. All I had to do was wait. That night, I sat in the living room with the television on low, the glow flickering across the walls. Some sitcom laugh track played faintly, but I barely heard it. My mind was alive with images: the ballroom at the Marriott, the chandeliers sparkling, the crowd in their tuxedos and gowns, the hush that would fall when I stepped through the doors. And then, the moment she would crumble, her lies collapsing around her like a poorly built bridge under its own weight. I rose and walked to the closet. My old black suit hung there, the one I had worn to Ellen's funeral. The fabric was worn, the shoulders a little loose now that age had thinned me. But it would serve. I pulled it down and brushed the dust away, hanging it carefully on the door. Tomorrow, I would have it pressed. As I ran my hand along the sleeve, I whispered, "Ellen, I'll keep my promise. Not the way we thought, but the way it must be. Indebted not." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, warming the worn wood floor. I rose early, brewed coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, the mug steaming in my hands. Outside, neighbors walked their dogs. Children rode their bikes with flags fluttering behind them. Life continued, ordinary and simple, while I prepared for something extraordinary. I opened the newspaper, but I barely read the words. My thoughts were already weeks ahead. At the wedding, each day was now a countdown, each task part of the preparation. The check was deposited. Soon it would bounce. Soon the cracks would show. That afternoon, as I trimmed the hedges along the porch, I heard the faint hum of a car slowing on the street. I looked up, expecting a delivery truck, but saw instead a familiar face in a familiar car. Margaret pulled into the driveway, her old sedan sputtering slightly as she parked. She stepped out, carrying a small paper bag. "I thought you could use some real food," she said, smiling warmly. I chuckled. You always did know when to show up. Inside, we sat at the kitchen table, eating the sandwiches she had brought from a deli downtown. The bread was crusty, the meat piled thick, and for a moment I felt the comfort of normal friendship. She studied me as she ate, her eyes sharp. "You're calmer than I expected. What did you do?" I sipped my coffee, leaning back in my chair. I gave her what she wanted, or at least what she thought she wanted. Margaret's eyes widened, then narrowed. "A check." I nodded. "Not a real one." She cashed it without a thought. "It'll bounce soon, and when it does, she'll be scrambling. That's when the truth will catch up with her." Margaret shook her head slowly, a mix of admiration and concern. "You're playing with fire, Franklin, but maybe that's what it takes." I looked out the window where the sun cast long shadows across the yard. "She buried me with lies, Margaret. It's time for her to see what it feels like to be buried by the truth." We sat in silence for a while. The only sounds the ticking of the clock and the faint chirp of birds outside. Later that night, after Margaret left, I returned to my desk and opened the notebook again. The blueprint was almost complete. She thought the money was hers. She thought she had secured her future, but she was standing on hollow ground, and soon the collapse would come. As I set the notebook aside and turned off the lamp, I whispered into the dark. Next stop, the wedding. The chandeliers of the Marriott ballroom gleamed like ice above the crowd as I slipped inside, every step carrying the weight of sacrifice and the fire of justice. I could feel the cold marble under my shoes as I moved quietly past the swinging doors that led from the service hallway into the grand room. The hum of voices, the clinking of glasses, the faint strains of a string quartet filled the space like a well-rehearsed symphony. This was the world my daughter had chosen, a world polished to perfection, gilded in wealth, and scrubbed clean of anything that reminded her of where she came from. I paused just inside, my heart pounding steady but strong. I remembered the phone call from Margaret weeks ago, when she whispered through tears that Victoria had declared me dead. That had been the moment I knew. I couldn't just confront her in private. The lie was too large, too poisonous. It needed to be broken in the very place where she had spun it into gold her wedding. The ballroom sparkled with crystal and silver. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne, their polished shoes clicking across the floor. Guests in tuxedos and silk gowns laughed and mingled, their words blending into a low buzz that seemed to stop, all at once, when I stepped forward. Gasps rippled through the room. A woman's glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the tile. "That's him," I heard someone whisper. "That's Victoria's father. But he's supposed to be dead." The whispers spread like fire through dry grass, reaching every corner of the room. Faces turned pale, eyes wide. People who had sent condolences now stared as though they had seen a ghost. And then I saw her. Victoria stood near the center of the room, framed by the glow of chandeliers, radiant in her ivory gown. Pearls glimmered at her throat. Her hair swept into a perfect twist. She looked every inch the bride she had always wanted to be, perfect, untouchable. But when her eyes landed on me, her smile froze. The color drained from her face before rushing back in a furious flush. "Dad," she hissed, striding forward, her dress swishing against the floor, her voice sharp enough to slice through the stunned silence. "What the hell are you doing here?" The crowd hushed. All eyes locked on us. Security men began to step forward, but she threw up a hand. "Number, I'll handle this." She turned back to me, her voice rising with panic and rage. "You weren't invited. I told you not to come. You're ruining everything." Her words hung in the air, brittle and desperate. I stood still, my old suit brushed clean, my tie knotted carefully that morning. I felt Ellen with me, her hand steadying mine even though she was long gone. Before anyone could stop her, Victoria snatched a tomato from a salad display on a nearby table. With a wild motion, she hurled it at me. The red orb burst against my chest, splattering juice across my lapel, dripping down my tie. Gasps erupted. A few nervous laughs scattered through the room. But I didn't flinch. Slowly, deliberately, I brushed the stain with my hand and looked at her with eyes as calm as steel. The microphone sat waiting on the reception table. It called to me like destiny. I strode forward, each step echoing in the marble silence. Guests parted as though I carried an invisible weight that pushed them aside. The chandeliers flickered above, scattering prisms of light across faces frozen in shock. When I reached the microphone, I picked it up. The cool metal hummed faintly with feedback as I tapped it once, twice. The sound carried through the ballroom, silencing even the whispers. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice even but carrying, "I am Franklin Hayes. Victoria's father, or at least I was, until she decided otherwise." A murmur swept the room. A woman dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. A man shook his head slowly, disbelief etched across his face. I continued, steady as stone. "A month ago, my daughter came to my home, not to invite me, not to share her joy, but to tell me that I was not welcome here today. She said I would embarrass her, that my suit, my simple life, my very presence would be a blemish on her perfect day." I paused, letting the words sink in. Around me, people shifted uncomfortably, their gazes flicking toward Victoria. She stood rigid, her hands clenched at her sides, her face twisting with panic. "But that wasn't enough," I said. "To keep me away." She told a lie so deep, so cruel, it cut to the bone. She told her friends, her family, perhaps even some of you here, that I was dead. The room erupted in whispers. Dead? She said accident. I sent flowers. Voices swelled in disbelief, in betrayal. Victoria lunged forward, her voice cracking. He's lying. He's trying to sabotage me. Don't listen to him. But her words trembled, and the cracks in her composure were as clear as fissures in glass. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a photograph. Ellen, Victoria, and me at a picnic. All smiles and sunlight. The edges were worn, but the truth was sharp. I held it up for all to see. I raised her after her mother died. I sold our bigger home to pay for her schooling. I worked double shifts to give her dance lessons, college tuition, everything she dreamed of. Ellen's insurance money, $50,000. I set aside for this day, for her wedding, a promise to her mother. But it was example. Gasps and murmurs grew louder. Some eyes filled with tears. And yet, I said, my voice dropping lower, the steel edge sharpening. When she came to me, it was not with love or gratitude, but with demands. She begged for that money, and I gave her a check. I let the words hang for a long moment, then leaned closer to the microphone. But here's the truth. That check was counterfeit, fake, drawn on an account that does not exist. And do you know what she did? I paused, scanning the room, my gaze sweeping across the rows of shocked faces. She deposited it, without question, without hesitation. That is how desperate her greed was. She didn't even stop to look. She only saw dollar signs. The ballroom erupted. Some guests gasped loudly. Others covered their mouths in horror. A man muttered, "Unbelievable." Women shook their heads. The sting of betrayal filled the air like static. Victoria's face crumpled. She stumbled a step forward, clutching the microphone stand. No, that's not true. He's bitter. He's trying to ruin me." "Alex," she turned to her groom. "Tell them." But Chadwick Monroe stood pale and rigid, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the floor. He said nothing. I set the microphone down with a soft click, the hum fading. The silence that followed was deafening. I turned and walked from the stage, through the stunned crowd. Guests pulled back as I passed, some reaching to pat my shoulder, others nodding with sympathy. Tears streamed down faces I didn't even know. Behind me, I could hear Victoria's voice breaking into sobs, her protests drowned out by the rising murmur of the crowd, by the sound of her carefully built world collapsing piece by piece. I didn't look back. The ballroom doors swung open, and I stepped into the cool night air. The city lights of Kansas City shimmered against the river in the distance. The breeze carried the faint sound of traffic, the world moving on, unbothered by the wreckage left behind. I inhaled deeply, the air cool against my tomato-stained suit. My chest felt lighter than it had in years. But even as I walked toward the street, the echo of her cries clung to me, a reminder that blood ties, once severed, left scars that no justice could fully erase. Inside, the chaos grew. Outside, I carried only the calm of a man who had spoken the truth. Victoria screamed for Alex to defend her, but Chadwick stepped back, face pale, leaving her isolated in the spotlight of her ruin. The next morning, I sipped my coffee in silence, the newspaper headline blazing across the front page. "Father returns from the dead to expose bride's lies." I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Victoria once colored as a child, where Ellen and I had shared countless quiet breakfasts. Now it was littered with yesterday's newspaper, bold black ink carrying my name into households across Kansas City. The photograph on the front page captured me at the microphone, tomato juice still wet on my suit, my hand raised with the photo of Ellen and Victoria. My face looked older than I felt, lined and weary, but resolute. The caption beneath read, "Truth from beyond the grave." Steam curled from my mug, the bitter aroma rising, steadying me. I took a long sip, the warmth grounding me after the storm of the night before. For the first time in years, I felt no weight pressing down, no invisible burden on my shoulders. The lie had been shattered, and the truth stood tall. As I turned the pages, I saw more stories. Guests had spoken to reporters, their quotes printed in neat columns. He spoke with dignity. We were in tears. Another said, "She told us he had died. I can't believe she would lie about something so sacred." There were even video clips circulating online, recorded on phones, already going viral. People were calling me a symbol of endurance, of truth. They didn't know the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the hollowing loneliness. They only saw the man who had risen from the grave his own daughter dug. But I knew, and that was enough. The house was still quiet, except for the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Outside, Neighbors walked their dogs, some pausing to glance at my house, whispering, then waving warmly when they caught sight of me through the window. Their faces held something different now, not pity, not curiosity, but respect. I thought of Margaret then. She had stood by me when the world believed I was gone. Her words echoed. Her true colors need to be shown publicly. She had been right. Without her encouragement, I might have simply swallowed the hurt, let Victoria's lie stand. But now, everything had changed. The doorbell rang. I rose slowly, joints stiff, and opened it to find Margaret standing there with a paper bag in her hands. "Morning," she said, her voice warm. "Brought you fresh rolls from Miller's Bakery. Thought you could use some company." I smiled, stepping aside. "Come in, Margaret. Always good to see you." We sat at the table, spreading butter across the warm rolls, sipping coffee as the sun rose higher. She glanced at the newspaper and shook her head. "I saw the story on the 6 o'clock news. Franklin, you've become a sensation. Half the city is talking about you." I chuckled softly. "Never thought I'd be famous for crashing my own daughter's wedding." Her eyes softened. "Not crashing, Franklin, revealing. You spoke with dignity, with truth. People see that. They respect it." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind only old friends could share. Then she spoke again, her tone gentle. "What happens now?" I stared at the photo on the wall, Ellen smiling beside me, Victoria beaming with childish joy. The edges of the frame were worn from years of dusting. "Now," I said slowly. I let it go. She made her choice. I made mine. I kept my promise to Ellen, not the way she would have imagined, but the way the truth demanded. Margaret reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. "Dignity matters more than approval, and you have yours intact." Later, after she left, I stepped outside. The morning sun was bright, warming the grass still damp with dew. I pulled the mower from the shed, its handle familiar in my grip. As the engine roared to life, the steady hum filled the quiet neighborhood. The scent of fresh-cut grass rose around me, earthy and clean. It was a simple act, mowing the lawn, something I had done thousands of times. But today, it felt different. Each pass across the yard was a reclamation, a statement that I still belonged here, in this life, in this world, no matter what lies had been told about me. By the time I finished, sweat dampened my shirt, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I shut off the mower and leaned on the handle, breathing in the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Back inside, I turned on the television. The morning news played clips from the wedding, the reporter's voice overlaying images of me at the microphone, Victoria's face pale and twisted in panic. The anchor shook her head. "It's a story of betrayal and truth, a father erased by lies, returning to expose them." Comments scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "That poor man gave everything. She'll regret this forever. Justice served. She made of 4. I turned the television off. I didn't need their validation. I had already won the only battle that mattered. In the quiet, I went to the desk in the living room. The old laptop sat there, its screen smudged with fingerprints, the notebook beside it filled with my careful writing. I flipped to the last page, where I had written, "Attend the wedding, speak the truth." Beneath it, I wrote a final line, "Promise kept." I leaned back in the chair, staring out the window at the sunlight spilling across the street. Children rode their bikes, dogs barked, a mailman strolled past. Normal life, steady and unbroken. I was part of it again, not erased, not buried, but present. Later that afternoon, Margaret called. Her voice carried both relief and concern. "I just wanted to hear you say you're all right." "I'm all right," I said softly. "Better than I've been in a long time." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Ellen would be proud of you." It still dated, not men. I swallowed hard, staring at the photograph of Ellen on the shelf. I hope so. When evening came, I made myself a simple dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup, the kind Ellen used to make on cool nights. I sat at the table with the meal, the house quiet except for the distant hum of cicadas. I thought of Victoria again, but not with rage, not even with sorrow, only acceptance. She had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. I lifted my spoon, whispered a quiet toast to Ellen's memory, and took a bite. As the sun dipped low, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was warm, carrying the scent of cut grass and charcoal grills from neighbors celebrating the long weekend. A few waved as they passed, and I lifted my hand in return. For the first time in years, their waves didn't feel like pity. They felt like acknowledgement, like belonging. I sat down on the porch steps, the wood warm beneath me, and let the quiet wrap around me. My suit from the night before still hung inside, tomato-stained and wrinkled. But I didn't mind. It had done its job. The promise was kept. The truth was told. My dignity was restored. And as the street grew quiet and the stars began to prick the sky, I whispered to myself, not in bitterness but in peace, the promise is kept not the way Ellen imagined, but in the truth she would have wanted. Dow. I looked out at the street, neighbors still waving warmly, and felt a deep certainty that I was not alone, not forgotten, not erased. I was still here. When I look back on everything that has happened, I feel a mix of sorrow and peace that words can hardly describe. I began this journey as a father who had given everything, a man who had carried promises like heavy beams across his shoulders, believing love and sacrifice would be enough. I had worked my hands raw, built a life out of long shifts and skipped meals, and poured every ounce of myself into a daughter I thought would one day understand. Instead, I was met with betrayal so deep it almost erased me. To hear my own child call me an embarrassment, to be told I had no place in her life, to have her spread the lie that I was dead, those wounds cut deeper than any physical injury I ever endured. I felt buried alive by her shame, but something inside me refused to stay buried. I could not let lies define me. I could not allow greed to swallow truth. I realized that dignity is not given by others. It is held within. And I still had mine. When I chose to act, I did not act out of cruelty. I acted out of justice. I had to remind myself that exposing the truth was not vengeance, but a reclamation of who I was. I had been silent for too long. I had endured her dismissal in the name of peace. But silence can become its own form of death. The night of that wedding, when I stepped into the ballroom filled with chandeliers and silk gowns, I carried more than my own pain. I carried the weight of every sacrifice Ellen and I had made, every promise whispered in the quiet hours after her passing. I carried the memory of the man I had always been, and I refused to let it be erased. As I took the microphone, I felt steady for the first time in years. My voice carried the truth that had been hidden too long. I told the story of my sacrifices, of the love that had shaped my daughter's life, of the lies she had spread to bury me. I revealed her greed in front of those who had once admired her polished mask. The collapse was not mine, it was hers. Her lies folded under the weight of truth, and all those who had believed her were forced to see. In that moment, I found something unexpected, peace. Not triumph, not cruelty, but peace. I had spoken the truth, and it was enough. The aftermath was quiet. The world looked at me differently, with respect instead of pity, with acknowledgement instead of dismissal. Neighbors waved with warmth. Old friends called with compassion. I had risen from the grave she had dug for me, and I stood taller for it. But what mattered most was what I found inside myself. I rediscovered a truth I had forgotten in the fog of sacrifice, that my worth was never tied to her acceptance. My dignity did not depend on her recognition. It lived within me, in the work of my hands, in the steadiness of my choices, in the promises I had kept even when no one else was watching. The true meaning of family is not about appearances or social standing. It is about love, loyalty, and respect. It is about remembering who stood by you when life was hard, who carried you when you were small, who gave without counting the cost. Family without respect is nothing more than a mask. I learned, painfully, that betrayal often comes from those you never expected, from the very people you believed would honor your sacrifices. But I also learned that betrayal carries its own consequences. Greed always devours itself. Lies always unravel when exposed to the light. And disrespect, no matter how well dressed, will one day crumble under the weight of truth. That dignity is worth more than gold. That respect is worth more than approval. And that truth will always outlast lies. I am no longer the man who sat in silence, swallowing hurt to keep the peace. I am the man who spoke, who reclaimed his voice, who stood before a crowd and reminded them that sacrifice deserves recognition, that love cannot be erased by lies. Do I wish things were different? Of course. I wish my daughter had chosen gratitude instead of greed, love instead of betrayal. I wish Ellen's dreams for her had been fulfilled with joy instead of disgrace. But I cannot change her choices. I can only live with my own. And I choose peace. I choose to honor the life I built, the promises I kept, the truth I told. I choose to remember that my worth was never hers to decide. I choose to walk forward lighter, free from the chains of her judgment. If you are listening to my story, know this. Never let anyone convince you that your dignity is disposable. Never let betrayal silence you. Stand firm in who you are, and trust that the truth, though painful, will always set you free. I stand now as a man who has lost much, but who has gained something even greater, self-respect reborn, I have seen what greed can do. I have watched it hollow out love, twist loyalty into manipulation, and turn promises into weapons. But I have also seen what courage can do. I have watched it lift a man from the grave of lies, restore his name, and bring him peace. That is my story. A story of sacrifice, betrayal, and finally, restoration. A story of a father who gave everything, only to be cast aside, but who found justice not in revenge, but in truth. I share it with you because I believe we all face moments when we must decide whether to stay silent or to speak, whether to accept erasure or to reclaim our place. If you take anything from my journey, let it be this: self-worth is priceless. Family is sacred when it is rooted in love, not in greed. And betrayal, no matter how sharp, cannot stand against the steady hand of justice. I sit here now, with peace in my heart. The storm has passed. The truth has been spoken. My name is not forgotten, not erased, but remembered for the man I truly am. And that, to me, is enough. Thank you for walking with me through this story. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And together, we remind the world that truth will always outlast lies.